cameras rolling as well?
Yes.
Okay.
Jim Mulligan interview, take 4.
Okay. Just waiting for a noise to go by. We have these flies
I know.
bothering us for some reason. So Louise, you were in a generation of women who had a very, hold on, I'll wait till. My mom was a single mother in the 50s and 60s, and we were the only divorced family in a parochial school of 1,200 kids. And I watched my mom sort of pioneer many things that she had to do on her own. She didn't have a man there to help her. Sometimes it really came home when I'd do my confirmation and I'd be the only kid without a dad there. You lived through all of this. For 7 years, your husband was gone. As a military bride, you probably had a certain amount of expectations about how life would go. And a lot of those things were changed, and you had to respond and grow. Can you speak a little bit about the personal changes and development and the kinds of things that you went through during Jim's absence?
Well, I think it was a growth period, certainly for me, because I had always just been a mother and a wife and stayed home, didn't work like so many of the young people do today, and had never done any public speaking to speak of other than maybe in front of a wives club as a treasurer or something. And then to be thrown into this situation. Of course, that didn't happen right away. But after Jim was shot down, he was actually the first one to be shot down in the Jacksonville area where we were at the time, because they had pulled his squadron out to send it on the Enterprise, which had an air group from California, Air Group 9. So there was no one else there that really understood the situation. But I had to make a decision on whether I wanted to stay in the Jacksonville area or not. But in the military, they always tell you to wait at least 3 months if you have a problem, and then make a decision. And I never liked Florida, so I talked to the boys, and we decided that we had been in Virginia Beach area for 3 years, and they liked it. They had a lot of friends. They'd been in school there. So we decided after they finished school, we moved up to Virginia, which was a good move because there were a whole group of women. And after we got settled, went to a luncheon, and it was for the POW and MIA wives. And I was amazed because I knew so many of the wives, and some of them had lost their husbands. And it was quite a shock, but at the same time, there were people that understood, and we could have a lot of camaraderie. So it was a growth experience. But, being a Navy wife, you're used to making decisions. And so I made the decisions I had to. Plus, the military, the Navy, is wonderful. If you had to be in any service and have this happen, the Navy was the one to be in, because you had immediately a CACO officer assigned, casualty assistance officer, and he would help you with any problems you had. Plus, I came from Massachusetts. We were a political family, and I knew how to get in touch with people I needed to.
So let's speak about that. In the beginning, the government told you and Sybil and others to keep everything under wraps. Is that correct?
Yes. They advised us in a telegram, actually, that our husbands would be best served if we were quiet, because they were afraid that, if we said something inadvertently, that they could be punished for it. So we were told to be quiet, and we were. Military wives learn to do pretty much what you're told, and that lasted for quite a while.
And what began to change that?
The length of time. And seeing nothing change. The military was being run from Washington, D.C. It wasn't being run for DOD, and pretty soon you found this out. Plus, I had a good mentor. Admiral Mark Hill had been Jim's squadron skipper many years before, and we had a close relationship, and he was wonderful. He had contacted Senator Kennedy before I left Florida, because we were residents of Massachusetts. And Kennedy called before I left, and when I was going from Jax to Massachusetts, I stopped in Washington and saw Kennedy. And at that time, Jim's name had not been released. They had seen him when he was shot down, but they didn't see him move. They just saw him taken by the North Vietnamese. So we really didn't know if he was alive. And my big thing was I wanted him acknowledged. So at the end of the war, they'd have to make good on him. So I went to Kennedy, and unbeknownst to me, he was head of the Detainee and Refugee Committee. And at that time, early in the war, '66, the French underground was still there, Bernard Fall. So he said, would you give me permission to start spreading Jim's name around? I said, absolutely. And Jackie was getting ready to go to Cambodia. So he said, she will ask Prince Sihanouk about Jim Mulligan. I said, great, whatever you can do. And it was real interesting because that was the end of May. And on the 7th of July, when I was in Massachusetts with family, they released Jim's name and his picture rather, and his name with the statement. So we knew he was alive.
And chart for me, if you can, just the change from the dutiful Navy wife who follows orders, in essence, your government was saying be quiet. The length of time ensued, and at some point along the way, you began to change your ideas of how you should respond. Could you talk about that?
Yes, it really started, Sybil had been up in Connecticut visiting with her family, and we had a mutual friend up there. And she was thinking of trying to organize the wives, the West and the East Coast. So she came, and the mutual friend mentioned to her that I was down here, and he thought that I would be a good contact. And I found out actually years later that when she came down here, she also contacted Jane Denton, and she had lunch with her and wanted to have a person here to organize the wives. Jane didn't feel she could do it at the time. Then she had dinner with me and asked me, and I said, sure, I'd be happy to do that.
So you had 5 boys.
6 boys.
6 boys. You had your hands full, but you began to fight for your husband and for the other POWs. Describe that process.
Well, it was a long, slow process. We really wanted in the beginning to just let people know that there were hundreds of men being held in North Vietnam, because this was a kind of an exclusive war in a lot of ways. They had pulled in all these young kids that weren't in college, a lot of reserves, and the country wasn't at war. So people really, unless you had someone directly involved, they didn't know what was going on. So we started slowly at first. I remember, I think my first contact was a fellow, kind of an evangelist on the radio, and he came to the house and I spoke to him, and he got it on the airwaves anyway. And I know at the time he wanted to have a great big thing in a stadium and whatnot, and I said, oh heavens no, we can't do that. Of course, 4 years ago we would have welcomed it. But that was it, and then we started contacting all the churches, writing to the heads of them, and basically speaking in the area to all the organizations, the men's organization, anybody that would listen to us, we would talk to them. And then, of course, we started to form the National League. And that was interesting because it started, and I don't remember the exact date of it, but we had 2 wives up in the DC area, and they organized a gathering at Constitution Hall. And they asked if I would come up and speak, and I said, sure. Well, Bob Dole was at that conference that we had up there, and there were very few people that attended. And of course, they were kind of afraid because there was a demonstration going on, some anti-war people, and they were afraid they might find out about us being in Constitution Hall. But it was a force showing, and spoke in that. And Bob Dole at the time was a little embarrassed, and he said, "We're going to redo this, and we'll pack this hall," and we did, or he did. I'm not sure that it wasn't a command performance, but that was a packed hall. And shortly, right after that, they stayed in D.C. and they formed the League of Families. I did not stay. As soon as I had given my talk, I left because our youngest son was making his first communion the next day.
So you're juggling childcare, and I'm sure you're getting neighbors to help watch the kids, and
Oh, yes.
and helping them with their homework, making their lunches, getting them to school, and still going into Washington and beating on doors.
And she's making that May Day presentation to a full house up there at Washington, which Chappie James was so impressed with when I came back.
And unbeknownst to you, your husband is a cell wall apart from Jim Stockdale. You're in constant communication with Sybil. The two of you are fighting for these two men. You have your ears to each other's wall as you share information. You have no idea that they're doing the same in Hanoi. As you uncovered this, as you uncovered the reality of what was going on for your husband, how did that affect you?
Well, I didn't know about Jim Stockdale being next to Jim, but I did know through intelligence that Jerry Denton and he were together. And so one Christmas when we were able to send a package, Jane and I got together, and I had found these, believe it or not, a martini in a can, and so I bought two. And I said to Jane, "Will you put one in your box and I'll put one in my box?" And I think that's how they knew that we knew they were together at some point.
Oh, that's really sweet. Jim, if someone had never met your wife and you were going to describe her, how would you describe her?
Well, before or after him?
Let's say after Hanoi.
Well, let me say this. When I came back, I really had expected to see Louise doing the things she normally would do, would be take care of the family and run the house and everything. I had no idea of her extracurricular activities in Washington and with the media, and with Life magazine, and all the speeches she made and all the organizations she put together down here with the Navy-wise and the Air Force-wise. When Chappie James briefed me about Louise on that first airplane ride from Travis coming east, that night I was coming home, I was just overwhelmed. But I really thought about it after I got back. I said, you know, Louise just stepped up to the plate. Louise is a take charge type of person, okay? Something needs to be done, she'll do it. She'll get it done. I always knew, for example, if I had to find out anything when I came back from Hanoi, I would just ask Louise. She'd make 2 or 3 phone calls and she'd have everything, okay? But she's a real great wife, a wonderful mother. She would have made a wonderful trial lawyer. She can read a contract, a very complicated contract, and know all the angles very easy, which I can't do, by the way. She has a lot of tremendous natural capabilities that had never been brought to fore until I was in Hanoi, when she had to be in her own and put all this stuff together and make all these big waves. And the interesting thing about her time that I found out when I came back, She was the most respected woman of all of the POWs, with all the people in the media, the print, the TV, the radio, and they all knew Louise. And they all knew one thing, she told it to them like it was, straight out. And they all respected her. And I just felt so proud that she did as much as she did, and she really kept me and the Alcatraz guys alive. We were dying until things changed right at that time, and she was at the forefront of that. So I'm very, very pleased to be known as Louise Mulligan's returned husband.
So it's safe to say, Louise, that your husband went away to war. Having been shot down and captured, he began a new war, a war behind walls. I know from my mom, watching my mom, that there had to be a lot of lonely times in those years when you didn't have anyone to turn to ask their advice about, you've got a son who's acting up or whatever it is that just comes about in raising families. And in addition to it, you're waging not only a war at home to keep you and your husband's family together and healthy and happy, but you're also waging a war in Washington. Did you always think of yourself as a warrior? Was that part of, or did you discover that in this process?
Well, I never thought of myself as a warrior, really. You know, you do what you have to do in this life. And there were, as far as the family was concerned, it was difficult. And there were many times our children all went to Star of the Sea School. And the Blessed Mother was in a little niche over that altar, and she and I had long conversations many times. And frankly, I don't know how anyone can get through this life, because we all have our crosses to bear. But without faith, I don't know how they do it. I really don't. And you know, you just do what you have to do. And some of our wives really couldn't get out in public, and that was no problem. There were a lot of other things that they could do. But you know, you had a lot of angry women. And as this thing went on year after year after year, and really no progress was being made, people got very, very angry and upset. And you know, the one thing, you don't send military men into war unless you let them win it.
And is it safe to say at a certain point you became angry?
Absolutely.
And can you tell me any stories of when you let Washington know you were going to take no more?
Well, I guess just talking to all the people up there, the congressional people we would go and see. And at the actually, toward the end of the war, I had to get out of everything because I was really in bad physical and mental shape. But the last meeting they had up there, I remember Valerie Kushner called. She's one of our wives. Her husband was a doctor, and he was held in the South. And she said, please come. And I could get Kennedy to come to anything, and he was not welcome because, you know, of his political views and whatnot, but he would come, and he came to that last meeting. And I made a statement there. But at the same time, we also, a group of us met with General Scowcroft. And we sat at a round table having coffee. And we were going through the same stuff, the rainy season, and they couldn't do this and they couldn't do that. And I just banged my fist on the table, all the coffee cups rose. And I said, General, all I want you guys to do is put your hat on the table if you're not going to stand behind our men. That's how angry I was.
Wow. Wow. What did you learn about yourself perhaps as a woman, perhaps as a wife, perhaps as an American in the course of this process?
Well, I learned that you can get a lot done if you really want to do things and if you're upfront with people. We never had a problem with the press because they knew we were truthful, what we were saying, and they knew why we were fighting so hard, and they were really with us all the way. And I guess you just learn that, you know, you can do anything you want to do in this country. No one ever came and criticized me, never. Even when I met with the anti-war people. I think they basically knew our men were not in a fighting capacity anymore. And there was no Red Cross inspection. There was nothing. And then one thing that really disturbed me was that our government allowed these anti-war people to go over to Hanoi. And they got in there and they started censoring the mail. They would meet with these men. They would torture them, so they'd meet with them. And then they'd allow them back in the country. That wasn't fair.
If you were going to describe your husband to someone who had never met him, how would you describe him?
He's a very honest, patriotic man, and he's done a lot for the country.
And what does, clearly you and your husband share a principled view of life. Principles are very important to you. Can you describe for me, if you can, and both of you, the principles that you hold together as dear? Your husband mentions them in his book: integrity, freedom, responsibility. But please, from your own words, you two are a very special couple. What do you believe in together?
Well, I think that we believe in a strong family. We've tried to do that with our children. We feel that they should have a belief in God. That is very important. Always be truthful and honest. And we're just basically family people.
We're Depression babies, Louise and I, and pre-World War II, and World War II, and Korea, and Vietnam. So we've been part of the toughest years this country has gone through in the last century. And we're very happy that we came out as well as we have. We remember the Depression years, I do, and so does Louise. When Roosevelt was elected, the song was "Happy Days Are Here Again," which was a great song for poor people who saw light at the end of the tunnel. Same thing's going wrong right now, by the way, with poor people who are going back to work, thank God, this year, I can't stand poverty. Other people, there's really nothing that can drag down a family or a human being that not being able to have a job. At least today, when that happens, you have some form of governmental assistance. But back in the early 30s, late 20s, early 30s, you didn't have that. I lived through that. I know what it is to be poor. I know what it is to be surrounded by poor people. So I empathize with people at the bottom of the barrel who are struggling to get out. And I want them to have jobs. And I want the country to grow positively, because it should grow. It has been growing. No need for it not to. It's a great society. And we're on the way. Well, things will work out fine for the United States of America, as long as we stick to our basic principles. We've got the greatest Constitution in the world, and it's been going 200 years right now. We need a few little changes, term limits, probably limit the age of federal judges, no life terms, and a few other things, improving the electoral process. Rome was a republic for almost more than 400 years before it became an empire. So we're at 200 years. If we reform it, we got a little bit. We probably have another 200 or 300 years before we screw it up again. But I have great hopes. You know, I'm a positive thinker. I was think tomorrow's going to be the best day of my life, and it is. Except for tomorrow. Today is the best day of my life. So I look forward to tomorrow, and I enjoy today. Now, that's where I'm coming from, and that's where she's coming from. She's at my side all the time. Keeps me out of trouble. And she's shaping me up a little bit. You know, we've been married now 70 years. I'm not quite right there, but a little more tweaking, she'll have me just perfect, you know? So I'm looking forward to our 75th, God willing, you know? It's been a wonderful, wonderful trip with all its ups and downs, including Hanoi.
Louise, what would be your advice for mothers of children whose one or the other of their parents is away serving their country, and you have to carry on at home? How do you best help the children to understand the role that one or the other of their parents is playing, and how best support them in processing that?
Well, I just think that, you know, you have to spend a lot of time with the children, really do. And it is difficult because I remember my phone starting to ring at 7:30, 8 o'clock in the morning and not stopping till 11 o'clock. And you have a child at your side and suddenly he says, "Why don't you talk to me? You're on the phone all the time." That's very difficult. I had my phones fixed so I could turn them off totally. They came and said, we really aren't supposed to do this. I said, please, just turn them off so I can turn the bell off. But you have to spend an awful lot of time, really. Keep them involved in sports. Keep them busy. It's very difficult, I think, for mothers today that have to work because you can't get that time back with the child. Once that time is gone, it's gone.
And how did you make the decision about what to include your children in terms of their awareness about what you knew was going on with their dad?
Well, they pretty much knew everything because when I decided to go public, I sat them all down and we discussed it. Of course, Neil was very young at the time. He was only 3 years old when Jim was shot down. But I would explain everything to them. And I said, now, once I go public, it's going to be like you're living in a glass fish bowl. And I said, you have to recognize this. But they agreed to go public. And I know when our oldest son went off to school, I told him he could go anywhere he wanted. And he wanted to go and be a geologist, and he went out to the Missouri School of Engineering and Mines. And it was very difficult because it wasn't a popular war. So I said, well, Jim, I said, just don't tell people where your dad is. But, you know, you can tell him he's in the military if you want, but just don't tell them. Because there were so many anti-war rallies and whatnot, especially on the coast. But he went out to Missouri, and that was an engineering school, so it wasn't as bad out there. But it was difficult for the children. And the one time that I remember that was so difficult, I had Neil in the back of the car, and he was probably about 5 or 6 years old. And we were going down Great Neck Road, which is right near where we live. And at that time, they would take prisoners and let them work on the roads, and they were in their prison garb. And Neil said to me, Mom, what are those? And I said, oh, they're prisoners, and they're working on the road. And then it dawned on me, he was relating these criminals to his father. So then I had to really backtrack and try to explain to him the difference. So there were some challenging times, shall we say.
Yeah. And today in the modern military, one of the huge questions that's at the forefront of returning warriors is how do we best bring them back into their homes, into what's normal? I imagine finding normal after all that you went through, Jim, in the Hanoi prison system was a process. For both of you, what worked well to reintegrate you to your home, and what might you have missed and in retrospect would recommend to others to make sure that they're returning warriors, that they're aware of that?
Well, you know, it's a different deal now because of world communications. All of our military people all around the world are one email from home. When I was flying for the Navy in Vietnam, the closest thing I could get to home was a mailed letter, or if I was lucky enough and I was in the Philippines or Hong Kong, I could pick up a phone, and for $20 I could talk for a minute and a half to my wife. Today it's a different world. They have instantaneous communications. Almost every wife has pretty much communications, at least on a weekly basis, many of them on a daily basis with their husband, so they know what's going on. And when I came back, I had missed 7.5 years of world's progress. And in the time I was gone, the world's knowledge had more than doubled, and I didn't know anything about it. I had personal friends that walked on the moon, and I didn't even know it, okay? That's how far back I was. And as soon as I got back, it was like a disaster. Almost all of us POWs in the first 6 months to a year after being home, we all had our first automobile accidents. And when I left, everybody was driving 55. When I came back, everybody was driving 70 plus. And you know, I'm driving a great big Ford vehicle that Ford gave me for a year for free. I'm driving at 70, 75, and all of a sudden I see something very interesting and I pay attention to it. And what saved me was the very good drivers around me who honked and got out of my... I could have killed myself a dozen times, except for people just reacted and got out of my way. The biggest problem for me, though, was there was something wrong with the country. I spent, you know, in the 60s, I had a high-pressure job in Washington for 18 months, and I was at the Armed Forces College for 6 months. The rest of the time, from 1959 to 1973, I was deployed, gone, type of deal. And so my recollection of the country was the stabilities of the 50s, of the late 50s, and 59. So I come back in 73, it's a different world completely. And I don't know what it is. It really had me frustrated. And it took me a year to figure this out. But during the 60s, the country went through a transition under the anti-war movement, the anti-Vietnam deal. A big, big transition, culturally and politically. But the biggest change was the country was a moral country in the 50s and after the 40s, after the big war. Everything was either it's right or it's wrong, it's up or it's down, and pretty distinct, okay? I come back in the 70s, and now it's a legal country. Legalism has crept in and it's running the country, and I can't believe the number of legal suits that are going. Everybody's suing everybody else, and there's no firm fixture of what's right, what's wrong. Now it's legal or it's illegal. In my own point, as I picked out, and I tell people all the time, just because it's legal doesn't mean it's right, and just because it's illegal doesn't mean it's wrong. And we got to get that squared away again, okay? This legalism is destructive to society, okay? And it causes the breakdown. And I really think that that's one of our big problems, and we're still going through a big time right now with our political upheavals on both sides of the political spectrum. You know, really, we've got to get back to basics, Judeo-Christian heritage, okay? Basically, that's what it is. You've got to get back to the Constitution. You got to know the Ten Commandments and the preamble to the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. If you've got those three things, you could be a hell of a fine American, live in a very, very stable, progressive society, which will take care of everybody, okay? And it's not the government that takes care of us, it's us taking care of each other. That's the way I look at it right now. So I find myself a very vocal, independent, conservative, traditional Christian American.
And Luis, your husband leaves for deployment. 7 years later, he returns. He's gone through these horrible experiences. They leave their marks in their own way on him and change him, some ways for the worse, perhaps some ways for the better. He's an outstanding human being. He's an outstanding human being. As his wife, as the mother of his children, as his partner, what did you discover in his return home that, I mean, those men dedicated themselves to return with honor. It was very, very important, it was central to their core. But their return to their home life, I think, was by and large, the architects of that return were those that loved them. And so what can you say about the returning warrior, and what would you say to another mother of young children with her husband returning who may have experienced any kind of trauma? What would you say is the best thing? What would you recommend? What are your thoughts on how best to return these warriors?
Well, it took a little while. That was a long, long time, but we were very fortunate here because we had gotten together with the Navy, and the head doctor over there, Dr. Arison at Portsmouth Naval Hospital, and that's where they went to stay as long as they needed to and for all their debriefings and everything else. And that was a wonderful setup because one of the big things, it was a small thing to us, right? But you have 5 or 6 children in the house. They've got pianos, they've got guitars, they've got sound systems. So the first thing I did was I moved all the children into the back of the house and put a door in the hallway. And we kept a bedroom that was off the den in the kitchen area with 2 doors because of the noise. The noise just really bothered Jim in the beginning because he wasn't used to it. And of course, he had to get used to the boys too. You know, all of a sudden there was a male figure in the house, and that took a little doing. But that was one of the things, and of course we had a lot of friends that were very good. It just took time. It takes understanding, and it takes a lot of patience, and it takes a lot of love. But the funniest thing I can remember happening, they were going to have, Nixon was going to have a big dinner at the White House for all the returned PWs and their wives or whatever. And I had decided that it was time for Jim to start making decisions because I had been making all the decisions. So he got on the phone to make plane reservations, and I was trying to explain to him that they had changed Memorial Day. Well, he could not fathom this. I said, you have to make a return flight because it's Memorial Day and we won't be able to get home. And the neighbors were going to have a big party for us that night. Well, he didn't know, I'll call in the morning, I'll make it, because we don't know what time, blah, blah. So, and I thought, well, if I take over now, that's not going to do any good. So we did, we went to DC, and of course we couldn't get home. We couldn't fly home. So we got on a bus, and came. Here we'd been at the White House at a gala dinner the night before, and we had to get on a bus to go from DC to Norfolk. And I called the house, and our son Kevin answered. I said, Kevin, meet us at the bus terminal in Norfolk at 3:30 today. And there's a pause. He says, you're riding a bus? I said, Kevin, shut up. Listen, meet me at the point at the bus depot. So there were quite a few challenges, you know, but it takes love and it takes understanding.
But you know, they changed all the holidays when I was born.
That's true.
I was raised on Memorial Day, the 30th of May, you know? Okay, and
This many years later,
Washington's birthday was the 22nd of February, and Lincoln's birthday was the 12th of February. And now the holiday's on the weekend. How did that happen, you know?
this many years later, he's still fighting it.
Oh yeah, exactly, exactly.
Every couple has little things that irritate you with each other, but I imagine that when Jim first came home, there was a long period where you probably were walking a little bit on tiptoe around each other. Can you remember when the first thing happened where you just kind of let him have it and you realized, oh, he's home? I mean, we're actually getting back to life.
I can't, Patrick.
Nothing like that.
Really, it's been a long time, you know,
Yeah,
since he's come home.
I
Yeah.
asked Dorothy McDaniel, and she related right away the story at one point where Red was doing something and it irritated her, and she just let him have it, and her mother happened to be in the kitchen. She turned and said, Dot, it's just wonderful hearing you yelling at him again. Because life was back.
Right.
Life
Yes.
was back.
Yeah.
Like, was there any kind of ways in which you realized life was back? Like when, in the beginning, I must have felt like almost anxious they could take him away again. And then suddenly you realize, no, you know, he's gonna be here next Saturday and we're making plans. Is that,
One of the problems we had at my house was the fact I was so used to just sitting around in my shorts in Hanoi. That's all I had, a pair of shorts. So I'm always walking around in shorts and sitting down, and Louise is trying to get clothes on me.
Well, you did that.
Dressed.
You did that in the hospital.
Yeah, all right.
When they came to fit his uniforms, he was the seamstress was right there, and he was just going to strip down and get into the clothes.
Yeah.
So you know, you had to guide him back to civilization.
yes.
I remember my first day at home. It was really wonderful. I come in about 3 o'clock from the hospital. I've been in the hospital since early February, right until April, 1st of April, first week of April. And I come home, and the kids are running around like mad, and everybody's getting settled, and it's a new house for me, and the dog is there, and the kids are in, and the front doorbell rings, and one of the kids goes running up there and says, Dad, it's for you, there's a lady wants to talk to you. So I go to open the door, and this lady's there, and she says to me, don't touch him. Don't touch that boy. Do not touch him. And I'm looking at her. She said, you know, she said, that kid of mine's been asking it since he's been 4 years old as a bully, and I told him he was going to get it one of these days. And don't touch that kid. Don't you touch him. I'll get his nose fixed up at Portsmouth. And I'm looking, she said, yes, he deserved it. He deserved the broken nose your son just gave him. This is my
Welcome home.
fifth son, welcome home. And of course, as I come in, there's Sean, of course, someone disturbed that some lady is already at his father, and he doesn't know his father, but he knows his father's probably going to be a little upset, you know. And he said, I didn't really start it, Dad. I said, okay. And then a couple of minutes later, he said, yeah, Dad, I got something. It was Friday. he said, I got this deal. And I looked at it. He said, you have to come with me and see the disciplinarian Monday morning. That's the first thing. What's going on, you know?
Welcome
What
home.
the hell have you done now? Well, I got in a fight with somebody else. So naturally, man, I take over right away and I march him in. And Monday morning, I have him right before I get up, before I even go there, I say, you sit there, you answer the question, you say, yes, sir, no, sir, you keep your mouth shut. So we get out there, and he's sitting there shaking in the corner because his dad is mad. And the receptionist says, Captain, would you go inside? Mr. So-and-so wants to see us. So I went in, shuts outside. And as soon as he shuts the door, he jumps up, shakes my hand, says, God, I'm glad to see you. He says, there's really nothing wrong with your kid. He needs a little self-discipline from Dad. He's going to be fine. He says, but I couldn't do it from here. But now that you're home, we got it squared away. Oh, that was my opening weekend. And of course, my number one son kissed me goodbye, and he said, I'm going to Texas to make my fortune in the oil business. It was a very interesting week, yeah. Yeah, it was a wonderful world.
I want to thank you both, and welcome home, Captain Mulligan. Even this
Appreciate it.
many years later.
You know, it's like yesterday. It's like yesterday. I can't believe how the years have gone by so fast, you know? We're coming up on next February, 46 years since we returned.
Yeah.
That's almost half a century. And I'm still here hanging in okay. Miss a lot of my good old friends who upstairs waiting for me to come, type of deal. Well, I think of them every day, and I say a prayer for them every day, and once in a while I send them a little message myself, just to make sure old times are still going well. But life has been very good for us, been very, very good for us. And I can honestly say that the lady sitting at my right hand right now, you know, all us naval aviators, we always we're reckless, we're type A's, but we always marry above ourselves. Actually, yeah. She has been the stability for me. Okay, she's kept me right on the straight and narrow, and made life really worthwhile. You know, it's been a real pleasure, and it's been a pleasure to be involved with this Stockdale program. I don't think that there is any other POW that has as much minute time as Stockdale as I do. See, I had the tap time with him and myself only from October of '67 to January of '69. And then I lived with him and Denton and Jenkins at different times in four-man rooms together. And then in '71, they moved the commanders in with three colonels, and Stockdale was right with me all the time. So I enjoyed the numerous political and historical conversations we had. Jim Stockdale was, according to me, the best educated Annapolis man I ever knew. But he was not educated at Annapolis, he was educated at Stanford, between his squadron deal and his CAG deal. He really got deep into education at Stanford. He was a wonderful guy and a good leader. And his compatriot, Jerry Denton, was the same way. Denton was, and Denton actually was my closest friend because I actually lived with him in Stocks, mostly from May of '67 till early September '67. Then we ended up in Alcatraz, and then we spent a year together when we get out of Alcatraz. Stockdale was in the same camp, and he was isolated, so he wasn't involved. Denton was running the camp at that time for that, until we were all moved back into the Hilton after the big Sante raid. Yeah. So I had the privilege of serving with, I consider, the best Navy people in the world, Stockdale and Denton and Jenkins and Rutledge, and of course my good friend from the Air Force, Sam Johnson, who Jerry and I used to say, Sam, you're so nice, you shouldn't really belong here, you belong in the Navy. Yeah. And of course, you know, Sam and I, his number one daughter, my number one son, married, and we have 6 very successful grandchildren. You know. Sam is just retiring from Congress as we speak. He's been in since '91, and I was very much involved with his first 4 or 5 campaigns. I would go out to Dallas and sort of run things for him and on the ground, and we're the closest of friends. He's a wonderful man. You know. So life's been good.
And to finish up, 2 last things. One is, can you tell me about when Irish Eyes Are Smiling?
Yeah, that was the song that everybody had. Each one of us at Alcatraz picked a song to identify ourselves. And when Irish Eyes Are Smiling was a song that was to identify me. That was my song.
And how would you signal each other? In other words, if you were walking down the hall, or how would it work?
Oh, well, we used the Denton cough code. Mine was M, and then his was D. And when Harry Jenkins and I were pulled out of the Hilton and stuck back into solitary, and 3 days before, Ligon and Stockdale and Denton were pulled out. We went into this building, and as soon as I went in at nighttime, I coughed an M, and I immediately got a D call, so that's how I knew that was right there. We always use that call, you know.
And you would whistle when Irish Eyes Are Smiling? Is that what?
You could whistle it, you could sing it, you could hum it, you could anything you want. There was one thing about the whistling, which I think was really funny. We had these peak holes at Alcatraz that we had pushed on the door so we could look out and see a little bit, and sometimes see the garden spots, and sometimes these people walking. Well, the guards found out that they could have a peek hole and look at and watch us. So when I discovered that they had deal to watch me, I would wait till a guy would get in position, and as soon as I knew he had me, I'd go. And I'd do this for 3 or 4 minutes, like I was communicating. This went on for about 3 or 4 days. It must have driven them crazy, because they took me to a quiz, and I was in a quiz with the bug. He'd been over there, and the bug says to me, you bad man, you make trumpet. You make trumpet. You communicate the trumpet. So we told them that we were aviators. We had super hearing like dogs, that we could hear this high deal. It drove them crazy. They actually believed that. It really tickled me. When he first said trumpet, I was trying to, I said, oh my God, it's the whistle deal.
Beautiful.
That's a great story about.
That is a great story.
Oh, yeah.
Lastly, speak, please, to young leaders of tomorrow about the importance of honor, the importance of leadership. What would you say to young ensigns today who are training to be our future leaders?
Well, first of all, if you're a young ensign with a group of ensigns, you ought to be able to, first of all, overlook your peers and pick out those guys who you know by looking at them that are in competition with you to be a leader. Certain leadership traits show up early in people's lives. Make those guys your friends, okay? Make those guys your friends. They're winners. Look for the winners in life, okay? And that's important as a career. But for an individual officer, you ought to sit down and figure out who you are, or who you want to be, okay? Or who you should be, or who you could be if you make the effort. You have to figure this out. And once you get yourself under control, then that gives you an opportunity to make yourself a better person to help those people. Believe it. You know, you've got to treat human beings as real human beings, as real worthwhile. Every human being is a worthwhile person. And it's in a position of leadership, it's your responsibility to get the highest potential out that person has out of that person. If they work for you in a squadron, you help them attain the best they can for the capabilities they have. In every type of action, in the professional, in the human relations, just in constant living. And always set the goal a little bit high. Shoot on the high side, okay? It's always better to be aiming a little above in the clouds rather than aiming in the gutter. Okay?
Wonderful.
And hold yourself to that responsible conduct. The people will look to you and automatically give you the respect that you deserve if you live up to that. And if you're not living up to it, don't expect respect. Okay?
And Kent, can you get it tight on Jim's face?
Name tag.
Jim, if you would, just state your name and rank upon retirement and the branch of the services you serve with, just so I have it on tape, so that I could.
Okay. I'm Jim Mulligan, Captain, United States Navy, retired, former naval aviator from World War II, Korea, and Vietnam. I flew airplanes from the Stearman, the SNJ, PBY, SNB, SB-2C, TBM, ADs, F4Us, T-28s, F9Fs, FAFs, and finally the A4. I have acquired a little more than 5,000 flight hours, almost all of it single engine, and 600 carrier landings. I suffered one bailout and 2 ejections during my career.
Thank you, sir. And Luis, thank you so much. It was really, truly a personal honor for me to be with both.
We'll get room till after. We can get it after.
You know what, while they're still sitting in, we should get it.
I mean, they've been
So
here.
we're gonna do something, it's called getting room tone. We just have 30 seconds of quiet with you there.
Okay.
And that helps the sound engineer take out background noise.
So Patrick, there's a series of planes, which is why I thought we might do it afterwards, let them go, because there's a plane going on there.
Yeah, okay, so we'll get room tone later. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Let's help them get out of there.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
wired up
Karen,
here.
can you help?